Breitbart News Daily here on Sirius XM Patriot 125. If you're just joining us, you will probably be aware that last night at around 8:45 Eastern Time, the USS Porter launched around 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles from the Eastern Mediterranean aimed at the Al-Shariat base in Syria. Lots of news coming out about that now. Lots of breaking news coming out about it. So we will keep you updated as that happens. As we understand it so far, further reports from the Russian military. 6 people have been killed in that attack. The airbase has been significantly damaged, hangars, the fuel depot, and aircraft. This is President Trump's response to the chemical attack that took place a few days ago. And we want to talk to you guys about it. 866-957-2874. Are you for it? Are you against it? Are you somewhere in the middle? Do you believe that the president should have sought congressional approval before this, or does that give the game away? When he said many, many red lines earlier this week, that was a bit of a giveaway that this was already in motion. This was already being planned. The ships were already being moved into position. And Britain's defense minister kind of giving that away in his statement today that he has been speaking with the Americans over the past few days on this issue. Italy has come out in support of it. Denmark has supported it. The United Kingdom is supporting it. And Turkey is going further in calling for regime change. And one might ask the question, does regime change become inevitable here? The primary objective obviously still seems to be Islamic State. However, is the secondary objective now regime change? Just days after Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said that it might be a fait accompli that Bashar al-Assad remains in permanence in power in Syria. We're going to go to Ben Harris-Quinney now to discuss that. Ben is the chairman of the Bow Group, the oldest conservative think tank in the United Kingdom. Ben, thank you for joining us this morning on Breitbart News Daily.
Good morning to you.
Ben, obviously lots to unpack about this, and breaking news still coming out and will continue to come out, I imagine, at least for the next 24 hours on this one attack alone. Let's start with the very basics of this. Is this something that you think was a proportionate and appropriate response to the alleged regime chemical attack in Syria?
Well, I think if it is the case that that Assad did carry out this chemical weapons attack, clearly it is deplorable and it is worthy of condemnation. The issue that I have with the action that President Trump chose to take yesterday was what's the exit strategy? Is this just a reaction to the chemical weapons attack and something that won't be taken any further, or does this set a different course on Trump's foreign policy to push for regime change in Syria? And if it does, what is the plan to unseat Assad, who is pretty close to winning the Syrian civil war, and who is it anticipated will rise to power that will be better than Assad in terms of human rights and opposition to ISIS?
It's an interesting question, and yeah, great point raised. There is obviously an end in sight at this point, in the sense that I'm not saying these people will stop fighting amongst themselves, but especially when it comes to the formal institutionalized Islamic State, there have been very many victories for the Assad regime with the assistance of the Russians on this. Where President Obama fell down, President Putin picked the whole issue back up. Where do you think this goes from here? Do you see, and you've seen a lot of these things happen over the past couple of decades, do you see an ability for President Trump to say to his advisors that have had an influence on him here, no, that was enough, to say to his military and to the generals, that was the only one we're doing? Do you see that as likely, or I see it, is actually when this sort of stuff happens, the machine kicks into gear, and it's very hard to stop the wheels turning at that point.
Well, it does, because it sets a precedent. Tillerson and Trump have also said that the future for Syria is not under Assad. I think that there is potential, if the United States was working in lockstep with Russia, to negotiate a schedule of transition from power for Assad, but that seems to have been torn up by this strike. And I think it really goes back to all of the problems we have seen with neoliberal interventionism in the Middle East and Africa over the last few decades, which is that whilst Assad may well be a terrible guy and may well be a terrible leader for the Syrian people, that does not mean that his replacement will be superior. What we've seen in Libya and Iraq and Afghanistan is actually a ceding of power to worse people than were there previously to Western intervention. And all logic seems to point to, if you remove Assad, the insurgent force is ISIS. We had all the nonsense a few years ago when David Cameron in the UK was pushing for on-the-ground military intervention, or the potential of on-the-ground military intervention in Syria. And he was almost laughing at the dispatch box when he was saying there are 80,000 moderate rebels ready to take power. It was total nonsense then. It was total nonsense in Libya, and it was total nonsense in Iraq. I personally, from a purely sort of realpolitik analysis of the situation in Syria, would rather see Assad in power than ISIS. And I think the West needs to wake up to the reality of the world, that we're not going to see liberal democracy flourish in Syria. And actually, it's far more dangerous for us if ISIS re-establishes a foothold in the country.
That does raise the question as to whether or not we become, in the West, and certainly in the United States, more susceptible to terrorist attacks on the U.S. homeland as a result of this. I've always been somebody who tries to push back against the idea that our foreign policy is a sole radicalizing factor, but there is no doubt in my mind that it forms part of an underpinning in terrorists' minds when they act, because they are indoctrinated to believe that Western foreign policy is the sole cause of all the problems in the Middle East. Do you fear that this now creates a sort of casus belli for terror cells here in the United States?
Well, I think there's a potential for that, but the larger potential lies in that if the United States is determined to intervene in Syria to instill regime change, that the vacuum of power that creates gives terrorists the opportunity to develop cells in the region that may have the potential to strike in the United States, and indeed that is what we have seen with the rise of ISIS in Iraq post-US intervention. So I'm less concerned about what these strikes on a Syrian airbase inspire in the local population in terms of radicalizing them. I'm more concerned about the vacuum of power that regime change creates and allows these horrific organisations like ISIS to get a foothold in the country. And whilst Assad may not be a good person or a good leader, frankly, he's better than ISIS, which is a brutal death cult, which has designs on killing everyone in the West, quite frankly.
Ben Harris-Quinney. Harris-Quinney, the chairman of the Bow Group think tank in the United Kingdom. Thank you for joining us here on Breitbart News Daily.
Thank you.